In this video, we're going to be talking about electrical systems for residential homes. Our goal is to share information that real estate agents working with home buyers should know. My name is Colin Smith, and I have with me Jesse Berkshire with Proud American Electric. While we would not recommend giving expert advice to your clients about electrical systems, it is important to know what to look out for, give them a base level of understanding, and know when to get a licensed electrician involved. Let's go and hop into it. So, Jesse, go ahead and tell me, why did you decide to get into becoming a licensed electrician?
So, I grew up in the Midwest, and I moved out here in 2011. I got hired by Solar City, and we ended up doing the bases in Colorado Springs. We did some work up in Denver, and, I decided that, I needed to take the next step, get my electrical license, become an electrician, and that's really how it happened.
Cool. And at what point did you transition from just being, I'm assuming a journeyman to a licensed electrician, and then deciding to start your own company?
Yeah, I think what happens is you spend so many years really learning, and when you start out, it's like you want to be at the top as soon as you can, and what you find out is it happens sooner than what you think. And so, I had worked for a few different companies. I had gotten my licensing. I'd worked as a crew lead. Work had kind of slowed down, and that was really the initial push to get me thinking about starting my own company.
Okay. And how long ago was that?
10 years ago.
Okay, cool. And I know I originally started working with another electrician that you then merged with, Terry with Empire Electric. How long did you guys merge companies?
Yeah, so we've been merged for the last 2.5 years. We've worked with Terry for a long time. We worked with Empire as a subcontractor when we first got into electrical work and didn't really have a strong customer base. And then, once Terry started talking about retiring, it was really a no-brainer to try to merge things and figure out how, both parties could benefit.
Very cool. So let's get and start talking about the electrical system. So power is coming from the power plants in some capacity, however that's generated. It's sent over these long transmission lines using direct current, and then goes to a transformer that then transforms the energy into alternating current. That then, with those transformers, those are usually close to the house. What do those usually look like?
So as far as your transformers go, depending on really the area that you live in, you're going to have either a pole-mounted transformer or a ground-mounted transformer. The pole-mounted transformers are typically going to be older. As the city expands, they're really trying to push everything underground to keep away from having service issues with wind and tree damage.
Okay, cool. How can you tell apart, because I know there's sometimes confusion between a transformer and a communications box. They're both green, they both have wires coming out of them. Usually, what's the difference in terms of what they actually look like and what's safe, what's not safe?
Yeah, so transformers are usually, just over waist height or just under waist height. Typically they have some kind of warning label on them that says that they do have high voltage power inside of them. To where the comms boxes are usually lighter plastic containers that maybe are easily broken or easily opened, whereas the transformers are steel and they have locks with special keys to open them.
Okay, got it. And you said older homes usually have overhead power. Do you know roughly what age they started transitioning from overhead to underground?
Yeah, so a lot of the west side has older power. A lot of the stuff in the Broadmoor has older power. Even on the east side of town, really some of I think that they started really pushing stuff underground in the last 10 years. So pretty much every new home that's built is underground. From what I've heard from the city, they're slowly kind of pushing across the city and really trying to bury everything eventually.
Okay, cool. So the power comes in from the transformer, comes into the home, and then it usually comes to a meter can. What do those look like? Where do you usually find them on the house?
Yeah, so if you're moving to like east of town, north of town, Black Forest area, you're going to most likely have a meter pedestal, which is a square post that's sticking out of the ground. Usually it has 1 to 2 meters inside of it. If you're in town, it's going to be on the house. It's going to be most likely it's going to be on the back side of the electrical panel. In some cases, in older homes, it's not necessarily like that, but for the most part, you'll be able to see exactly where that service comes in.
Okay, got it. And if something were to happen to that meter, is that the financial responsibility of the homeowner or the city?
So, in cases of like damaged meters, say a meter gets damaged or it malfunctions, utilities is going to come swap that out. If you're having any issues with your power and you think that there's an issue with the meter, they will come out and check that for free. In the event that you have like, some kind of tree damage, maybe a semi truck runs into your power line because it's hanging too low, they're going to consider any of that damage the responsibility of the customer. And most of the time in heavy snowstorms and windstorms, we see those emergency service calls, and it unfortunately goes back on the customer's insurance.
Got it. Okay, well, that's good to know. All right, so then the electric goes from the meter to the panel. At what point in time is it always the responsibility of the homeowner's financial cost when something breaks?
So the utility considers it anything beyond their service lines. So if the service lines come in overhead, as soon as it connects to the riser pipe that we run up the wall, that's considered the customer's property. Depending on what that looks like, if you're coming underground, you're really not susceptible to damage like that.
Okay, got it. So then it goes to the electrical panel. What is the real purpose of the electrical panel?
So, your electrical panel, basically, you have your main breaker, and that is to protect the lines coming in from the city. That's so if you're pulling too much power, it will turn the power off before it overheats the wires. All of the breakers in your house serve the same purpose, just for individual loads, whether it's your kitchen, whether it's an air conditioner, a hot tub, a microwave, just general outlets and lights. And so the city specs it out to certain code standards that require a minimum of, a certain amount of circuits for your square footage, a certain amount of circuits for your kitchen, and a certain amount of different amenities throughout the house per code. And so essentially your breakers are there to protect the individual circuits that it serves, whether it's your master bedroom or whether it's your hot tub in the back.
Okay, got it. Usually what's like the lifespan of a electrical panel that's getting installed?
So, that's debatable, depending on who you talk to. But realistically, you're looking at 30 to 50 years is really the time frame. And you also have to consider what conditions the panel has been under, because when we open up an electrical panel, we can see if the wires are discolored from overheating, right? We can see if there's signs of burning or issues. We can tell if breakers are loose in the panel, which would indicate, just like old components. And there are situations where you can swap out all the breakers, but realistically, you'll spend as much money swapping out the breakers as you will just doing a panel upgrade. So, if you are a large family that uses a ton of power and you have kids that have this, and you have an electric vehicle and a hot tub and a steam shower and you have an electric range, right? All of those things add up. And so, if you buy a house brand new, you kind of know what that looks like. If you get a house and it gets inspected and you have, a panel that's been changed within the last 5 or so years, what you're going to see is like you should be good for the next 30 to 40, 50 years.
Okay, good to know. Now, I know as real estate agents, we always hear about the Federal Pacific electrical panels. Those are the panels you really need to be worried about.
Mm-hmm.
What are some of the other brands that are maybe less commonly known?
You have the push-o-matics. They're the breakers that you push in and push out. The real issues with these panels are, mismanufactured breakers that you can no longer find replacements for. The breakers are always going to be the biggest issue because the panels are just, a metal box with a copper bus bar in it that you clip breakers to. And so the breakers are really the protection for your house. And just to be clear, they do make replacement breakers for Federal Pacific panels, but they're very expensive. And just to reiterate, most of the time in whatever situation that looks like, minus like extreme conditions where equipment has to be within code range and is no longer within code range. And so it makes more sense to swap the breakers out instead of the whole panel, because sometimes having to bring things up to code can, open up different doors that maybe, the customers are not ready for.
Okay, got it. I've also heard them referred to as a stab lock design. What does that mean? How is that different to today's panels?
Yeah, so today's panels have essentially the copper bus bar on the back of the panel has prongs that protrude out from the back of the panel. Now, our breakers clip into those prongs, where stab lock breakers have prongs on the actual breaker that stab into the bus bar. So, essentially, you can't make the stab lock on the breakers nearly as strong as you could the stab on the bus bar, which allows the breakers to be more flexible.
Okay. And is it like a fire risk having these panels still in the house, or what's sort of the real risk?
So the real risk that I see when I go out and service these calls is that you have handyman or fix and flip type contractors that maybe don't have the best quality in mind, or maybe they're just getting their foot in the door and they're really trying to make a name for themselves, but they don't have all the knowledge necessary. So when we see handymen go into houses, a lot of the times when it comes to electrical, we're seeing that wires, because each breaker is rated for the wire that it's associated with. So, if it's a 20 amp wire, it has a specific, breaker that goes with the 20 amp breaker, and that keeps everything within ratio. What happens is when handymen don't understand that other things are tied to those circuits, or homeowners as well, what happens is you have overloaded circuits, and now instead of having a circuit for my bedroom and a circuit for my living room and a circuit for my dining, now we have the living room and the bedroom on one circuit. And because the breakers are really the problem there, what happens is when the circuit gets hot, the breaker's supposed to trip. But if the stab lock breakers don't trip, then the wire will just cook. And once the wire gets hot enough, it will melt the sheathing on the cable. And then what that does is it eventually makes contact with either the metal or another conductor and will short out that breaker, and it either cause a fire or trip the main breaker.
Okay, got it. So right now it's early 2025. What is a typical panel replacement cost?
So we do a standard panel replacement for $5,000. We go up to $7,000. It really just depends kind of on the scope of work with the panel, but between $5,000 and $7,000, I think, is a very fair deal in this town specifically. Anything over that, I mean, you could find 100 electricians that will do a good job for you, within those ranges.
Okay, cool. And just so agents know, something that wasn't always the case a few years ago, but is starting to become very prevalent today, is that when a property is selling, buyers are out shopping for property insurance. And when the insurance company asks what brand of panel is in the home, there's a lot of companies that are looking for ways to deny new policies. And so I'm finding that there's a lot of home buyers who can't get insurance with these policies, almost forcing those panel upgrades right now by the insurance companies. Because if you don't have insurance, then you can't get the mortgage, because the mortgage company won't lend on a property without that property insurance in place. So I've definitely seen that become a negotiation point between buyer and seller that maybe wasn't part of the original inspection objection or home inspection negotiations. Okay, so we chat about the panel. Panel goes to then all the wires that distributes throughout the house. What are some concerns you've seen with, either old or new wiring, maybe improper installation of wiring?
Yeah, I think the biggest issue when we see, when we look at the wiring is going to be knob and tube and what we call BX cable. And BX cable is like a metal-clad cable, but it's an older version of that metal-clad cable. And what happens is the cloth sheathing is wrapped around some kind of, plastic sheathing that essentially crumbles over time. So what we find is we get into these boxes with the BX cable, and you just go to take off a wire nut, and the sheathing around the actual metal wire just deteriorates, right? And that's when I look into wiring, BX is really kind of the worst of it. Knob and tube is still not great, but I would say BX is what we see the most problems with, just because of how the cable is. You can get in a box to replace a ceiling fan, and then leave with a direct short because the cable broke and it's at the top of the box grounding out, right? And so knob and tube and BX cable, really should be addressed as soon as possible. The issue with knob and tube is if you do have any critters in your attic or crawl spaces or wherever, that can really lead to inadvertent damage, whether they're chewing on it or whether they're just trying to nest somewhere and get, caught up in some wiring and damage it or whatever that looks like.
Okay. Yeah, good to know. And if a home needed to be totally rewired, I realize that's a wide range, but let's say your average 2,500, maybe 2,000 square foot home, what are we sort of looking at?
So most of those homes that need rewired are going to be plaster and lath. They're going to be mostly brick houses with plaster and lath, sometimes siding with plaster and lath, mainly plaster and lath though. And what I can tell you is it really is variable. We had a customer off of Nevada. We did a whole rewire for, cost her $6,000, right? Then we had a lady who owned a duplex on Wasatch, same kind of deal, but it cost her closer to $15,000 per unit because there was blocking in the one unit where the other unit was empty walls. So we literally tied onto the cable, pulled it up the wall. It was done. Where, the duplex units, we had to cut holes in the ceiling. We had to cut holes in the wall where there was horizontal blocking. And it really just added to that time and labor. And then also, we had to get drywall in there fixed as well. So, those kind of things are really the considerations when you're looking at getting a rewire, because most of the time, when you're getting a rewire, there's going to be a panel upgrade in there as well. And you can get discounts depending on what that looks like. But, for the most part, you wouldn't replace all new wiring in your house and then leave a bad panel, right?
Fair. Okay, got it. And then I've only seen it a few times, but I've also seen aluminum wiring. And I know home inspectors make a big deal about aluminum wiring. What's the concern there? What should we do? What's, kind of safe practice?
Yeah. So with aluminum wiring, it's standard electrical practice even nowadays to use aluminum wire for your larger circuits, like your range, your hot tubs, steam showers, EVs. But back in the day, they used to do it for your living room and your kitchen. And what happens is those sizings are different than the copper sizings. So, kind of going back to maybe the honeydew type list stuff where people are trying to fix stuff and maybe don't know as much. You can tie a number 12 aluminum onto a number 12 copper and think that it's okay, when in reality, then the number 12 aluminum is only rated for 15 amps, where the number 12 copper is rated at 20. And you would think that the 5 amps doesn't make that much of a difference. But then you combine that with breakers that don't trip, right, due to being old or Federal Pacific or whatever that looks like. And that's really where you start to see the aluminum will melt faster.
Okay, got it. I've heard of people pigtailing wires when the home is full of aluminum wiring. What is that? Is that something you'd recommend or recommend avoiding?
So, as long as your wiring is sufficient and adequate in size, then, that could be a good practice. I think, if your breaker is overloaded, pigtailing, it's not going to really give you, a ton of, advantage there. But I could see where, in the event that the customer is like, look, I just want to swap out my outlets, and I think that as long as you check the wiring and it's all breakered out correctly, that it's fine. Then pigtailing the outlets would be a great idea.
Okay, good to know. And then something I'll also see a lot of times in home inspection reports is ungrounded outlets. Certainly every now and then it's okay, it just didn't get wired up correctly, but sometimes it's the entire house doesn't have any grounds in it. What is happening there, and what do you suggest when you come across those types of properties?
Yeah, so that's that BX cable that I was talking about, and essentially they don't carry the ground through the cable. That it's only a hot and a neutral. So typically, every home inspector is going to flag you on not having grounded outlets. The way that we fix that to code is we add GFI protection in the circuit, whether that's a breaker or whether that's a GFI in the first outlet that feeds the rest of the chain. Your ground is ground fault protection, right? So your GFI is a ground fault protective device, and so it serves as your path to ground in the event that there's an issue on those circuits. So, really the only way to fix those is to either, bring in another wire that has a ground, or to add a GFI in line.
Okay, so the wiring comes through the house, and then it goes to all the outlets and switches. What sort of concerns do you usually see with the outlets and the switches specifically?
Yeah, most of the time, we find loose outlets, broken cover plates, damaged outlets where it's just the plastic face is broken. With switches, we find switches that maybe aren't switching correctly, or maybe are dimmer switches that are maybe not working correctly, or just outdated switches that are, that only have the two screws on them and not the ground wire.
Okay, got it. In terms of DIY work versus getting, your company involved, at what point in time would you suggest, DIY is probably okay versus you really should be calling a licensed electrician?
Yeah, definitely. So I would say, switching out cover plates definitely is DIY friendly. And it really just depends on the skill level of the DIY, right? Swapping out a light can be definitely DIY friendly. Putting in a chandelier, maybe not so much.
Okay, good to know. And then in terms of pulling permits, so at some point in time, certain work requires getting regional building involved. Usually what level are we having to get regional building to come out and inspect work and pulling a permit?
Yeah, definitely. So the building department wants you to pull a permit in the event that you're doing new work. So if a light breaks and you swap it out for a light fixture, they're considering that a repair. If you're extending the circuit, if you're swapping out all of the outlets in your house, then they're going to want you to pull a permit for that. But if you have a damaged outlet and you're replacing it, as a repair, then you do not need to pull a permit for that.
Okay, good to know. Just in general, what else should real estate agents know when working with their home buyers about, residential electric?
I would say, the one thing to look out for It's just unpermitted work that could affect the property's value.
All right, last question is, how can people find out more about you?
Yeah, definitely. So if anyone is looking for any electrical work, feel free to reach out. We are Colorado Springs local Better Business Bureau A+ rated electrical contractors. You can find us at proudamericansolar.com. You can find us on Google, Facebook, LinkedIn. I mean, we're all over the place. So we are local. We do a lifetime warranty on all of our labor.
Cool. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Jesse. Again, my name is Colin Smith with Solid Rock Realty. Be sure to click the like button and subscribe to our channel for more information about real estate tips, news, information, and more.